Welcome to this in-depth discussion. Today, we will be looking at some very interesting material provided by Vita Choice Ltd. The topic is the nature and operating principles of consciousness. Some of the viewpoints presented in this material, especially regarding the relationship between the brain and consciousness, might require you to reconsider your usual way of thinking. Indeed, the perspectives within are quite unique, and some points could even be described as quite revolutionary. For example, it begins by stating that consciousness is not inside, not outside, not in the middle, yet it can influence all three. Doesn't that sound a bit mysterious? A bit like a riddle, right? However, the material seems to use an analogy to help explain this. Yes, it uses an analogy to aid understanding. It is like when you want to type on a computer. The thought itself of wanting to type cannot directly hit the keys, right? You need a medium, like your fingers, or perhaps the currently popular brain-computer interfaces. Exactly. The point is that consciousness itself does not act directly. It requires something like a converter or an execution tool. This material posits that consciousness first issues an intention, or a thought. The thought comes first, right, and then certain very small structures within the brain, which the material calls microtubules, part of the cytoskeleton, act like antennas or switches, receiving the command and beginning to activate, then transmitting signals. So, this highlights a core difference here. This material believes the sequence is consciousness's intention first, then brain activity, as opposed to the more common view we hear, which suggests brain activity produces consciousness. The direction is reversed. Yes, that's very important. However, the material does add a supplement, sensory information collection, like the eyes and ears receiving external messages, which is more passive, operates differently, more like a receiver. I understand. This consciousness first perspective is indeed a core idea running through the entire document. Next, it uses another computer analogy to discuss memory. This part also significantly challenges our conventional understanding. It uses the computer's RAM and hard drive. Those more superficial, easily forgotten memories in our daily lives are like the computer's RAM, temporarily storing information, perhaps lost after the power is off, and easily overwritten by new data. Yes, temporary storage. The other type is deeper, more lasting memory. The material borrows a term from Buddhism called the alaya vijnana storehouse consciousness, often understood as a reservoir storing all our actions, imprints of experiences, a very deep consciousness warehouse. This part is likened to a computer's hard drive, where data is stored more stably. Okay, RAM and hard drive. This analogy is relatively easy to grasp. But what comes next is what I found most astonishing and thought-provoking in this material. Its claim. It states that this hard drive storing all experiences, this so-called alaya vijnana, is not located within our body. Wait a minute, this viewpoint is truly subverting. If it's not in the body, where is it? The material suggests that this database storing all life experiences is not confined to one specific brain or body but exists in what it calls a universal information wave. A universal information wave, yes, like a wave pervasive throughout the entire universe, or an information field. So, the most fundamental challenge of this material is that your deepest memories, the entire record of your life, is not stored in the organ of your brain but rather like an information field diffused throughout the universe. This completely changes our basic view of where personal memory resides. And the material adds that every thought, every idea you have, generates such a wave and instantly spreads across the entire universe, instantly across the whole universe. That scope is too vast. The question then arises, if this is true, why isn't every thought immediately realized? Or why aren't we overwhelmed by the thoughts of everyone in the universe? The real world doesn't seem that chaotic, does it? Yes, that's a good question. This leads to the key aspects of repetition and focus mentioned in the material. According to the material, a single, fleeting thought, although it generates a wave, is like a small ripple on the water. A small ripple, very weak, disappearing quickly, only when a thought is repeated constantly. Continuously observed, this observation sounds more like sustained attention from consciousness. Yes, exactly, sustained focus from consciousness, and high concentration is applied. Like the example the material mentioned regarding Musk and his business goals. Wow, extreme focus, that all-in feeling. Yes, that's it. It is precisely that long-term, high-intensity focus that the material believes allows these focused intention waves to undergo a phenomenon. The material borrows a concept from physics here, though it functions more as a metaphor. It mentions something related to quantum mechanics. Yes, a bit like that, but primarily as a metaphor to try to explain how focused intention condenses from a more nebulous state of possibility, the wave state, into a more concrete, stable state similar to the particle state. So, the metaphor intends to convey that through sustained focus, the energy of the intention can condense from potential possibility into something closer to reality. Is that the meaning? Yes, these so-called particles continuously superpose, ultimately potentially manifesting as results we can observe, such as the success of a venture or the birth of a product. Conversely, most of the fleeting thoughts in our daily lives drifting from one thing to another, yes, tons of them, because they lack sufficient repetition and focus, are like computer files that get overwritten before being saved. They rarely form any substantial impact on reality and don't leave any deep imprint in that hard drive of the universal information wave. The concept that memory's hard drive is not in the body and that thoughts influence reality through focus and superposition, it is indeed abstract and bold. So, does each person primarily read and influence the information field related to themselves? Right, otherwise, wouldn't the world be in total chaos? The material's argument is correct in that regard. Although information waves permeate the universe, the individual mainly interacts with the information field associated with themselves. Much like having your own cloud drive account, this analogy makes it easier to understand. Furthermore, for an intention to collapse into a concrete physical reality, for example, if you think an apple should appear on the table right now, the material suggests that many other conditions must align, including the constraints of the physical world, the properties of matter itself, and possibly even the intentions of other people involved. Many factors. Yes, a single intention is unlikely to directly conjure up a complex reality. I understand. So, this part challenges our understanding of how memory is formed. To summarize, this view suggests consciousness is more fundamental. Memory might be a kind of universal information wave. The hard drive isn't in the body, and the repetition and focus of thought are key to influencing reality. To further support this view that consciousness is not entirely dependent on the brain, the material seems to cite some rare medical cases. Yes, these cases are used to question the traditional view that consciousness is entirely a product of brain function. For instance, the very few cases of anencephaly infants or those with severe hydrocephalus where the cerebral cortex is compressed to a very thin layer. These cases are indeed rare and sound very distressing. What is the material's intention in citing them? We must understand the material's intent here very carefully. These are absolutely not common situations, and the medical community may have different explanations. Yes, but the material cites them primarily to pose a question. If the brain is the absolutely necessary foundation for generating consciousness, then in these cases where brain structure is severely deficient or damaged, what is the source of the reactions they exhibit, even if very faint? Simply put, if the brain is the computer hardware and consciousness is the software, where does the residual software reaction come from when the hardware is severely broken? This challenges the idea that software is entirely dependent on hardware. This question is certainly thought-provoking. Did the material also challenge this from the opposite direction? Yes, it asks in reverse. If a fully functional brain equals normal consciousness, why is it that in some psychiatric patients, their brain scans show an intact structure with no obvious damage, yet their state of consciousness is confused and unable to function normally? Both lines of questioning point to a core issue. is the brain activity we observe using instruments like EEG or fMRI, which brain region lights up the source of consciousness itself. Or is it merely a signal or phenomenon that accompanies the nervous system executing tasks after consciousness has already issued the command? This material's argument clearly leans towards the latter. It speculates that the brain activity we observe is more like the signal generated when consciousness operates through the brain as a tool or interface, rather than the brain independently producing consciousness. The brain activity is the operational signal, not the source. Yes, those rare cases are used to support this consciousness first, brain as medium view. This offers a very different perspective on the relationship between the brain and consciousness. Next, the material explores a more subjective viewpoint. Where exactly does consciousness exert its influence? The material suggests that the point of action seems to depend on our designation or belief. This sounds even more mysterious. This viewpoint is indeed very subjective but can be seen as an extension of the previous discussion. The material states that if you are deeply convinced that the brain is thinking, the influence of consciousness will mainly manifest in the brain region. But if your culture or belief system holds that the heart, perhaps meaning near the physical heart, or a more abstract central concept, is perceiving and thinking, then the point of action might manifest there primarily. The material even speculates that if you strongly believe another part of the body, say, your feet, is leading consciousness, the point of action might shift accordingly. This sounds somewhat arbitrary. This view, that the point of action is guided by designation, is used by the material to attempt to explain a phenomenon. Why human history has seen the deification of natural forces, like gods of fire or thunder. Yes, the material speculates that if ancient people truly, very firmly believed and continuously connected with or cultivated a relationship with a certain natural force, they might have, to some extent, become an embodiment or a channel for that force. The key returns to the power of belief and focus. So, this implies that our consciousness is not only fundamental but its focal point can also be guided, and even shaped, by our own belief systems. The material's viewpoint seems to suggest this. Indeed, based on this, it goes on to distinguish between two very different modes of mental operation. The first one is likely familiar to most of us, which the material calls weaving. Weaving, that sounds like constantly spinning stories in the head, daydreaming like a little theater constantly staging inner dramas. This analogy is very fitting. The mind can't stop, constantly judging, worrying about the future, regretting the past, endlessly imagining and fabricating plots, discussing others. The material believes this weaving state is often chaotic, energy-consuming, and unintentional, even using terms like folly or ignorance because it often deviates from reality, not only failing to solve problems but creating more distress. That sounds right. It really is the daily state for many people. And the other mode, which seems more favored, yes, the other state, the material borrows another term, wise observation or discerning wisdom. We must clarify first, the material emphasizes this is not referring to some superpower, not a superpower. Yes, instead, it is a quality or ability of the mind. Wise observation sounds quite profound. What specific ability does it refer to? According to the material's explanation, it refers to the ability to observe the original appearance of things, their mechanisms, and their relationships with clarity, truthfulness, precision, and subtlety. The key point is that when observing, one does not mix in personal subjective imagination, emotional projection, or value judgments, no embellishment. Yes, it's like when you examine a computer. You don't imagine it can fly or burrow underground but clearly know the functions of the CPU, memory, and hard drive and how they work together. It's a pure understanding of facts and principles. Exactly. Because you grasp the actual situation and the rules, you can effectively respond to and solve problems. Once the problem is solved, you let it go, not getting stuck in that weaving loop. So, it can be understood that wise observation focuses on truthful observation and cognition, while weaving means detaching from reality, carried away by emotions and imagination. The material seems to imply that which mode we primarily adopt will greatly affect our real-life experience and life outcomes. The material certainly means this, and more importantly, it believes that this ability of wise observation is not unattainable but can be cultivated and improved through learning and deliberate practice. That does offer quite positive possibilities. And towards the end, the material seems to cite some examples to question some of our current established scientific understandings, like the cause of lightning. Is its purpose to encourage us to maintain a more open attitude of inquiry? It seems so. The purpose is not to completely deny existing scientific explanations but to remind us that science itself is a constantly evolving process, and we should not treat conclusions reached at a certain stage as absolute truth. We should leave room for exploration of the unknown. Regarding lightning, the current explanation mostly states that static electricity is generated by the friction of ice crystals and water droplets within the cloud, which then accumulates and discharges. Yes, we've learned that in textbooks, but the material questions, how can such a vast cloud continuously generate such powerful charges so many times? Where is that energy replenished so quickly? A single lightning strike should neutralize a large amount of charge. How is the energy for the next strike so rapidly accumulated? These questions point out the potential complexity in the phenomenon that we have not fully grasped. Raising these questions is not about providing an immediate answer but about indicating that even for phenomena that seem already explained, our understanding may still be insufficient or incomplete. Exactly. This connects back to the core message of this material, to encourage everyone, especially those eager for knowledge like yourself who want to deeply understand the nature of things, to avoid jumping to conclusions when facing any phenomenon or theory before conducting thorough observation and understanding. This is indeed a very important reminder to avoid having your thinking constrained by existing frameworks. It encourages us to embrace diverse viewpoints and to observe, question, and understand this complex world using methods that are more nuanced, deeper, and perhaps even transcend current cognitive models. So, in this discussion, we have summarized some very unique views from the Vita Choice Ltd material regarding consciousness, such as consciousness possibly being more fundamental and not entirely restricted by the brain, its point of action possibly being guided by belief and focus, deep memory perhaps existing in the form of universal information waves, and wise observation being a more beneficial mode of cognition. What might all this mean for you personally? Finally, I want to leave you with a question that might be worth serious consideration in your life going forward. If, as this material strongly suggests, our consciousness is truly not entirely constrained by the physical brain, and its focal point can, to a significant extent, be guided by our beliefs and focus, does this mean that your own intentions, your focus, and the way you observe the world, whether leaning towards weaving or wise observation, play a much more critical and profound role in shaping your reality experience, responding to challenges, and ultimately, your life journey than we usually recognize? And is that ability to truthfully observe and understand the world, called wise observation, something you can gradually cultivate and enhance through daily awareness and deliberate practice? These questions might just be waiting for you to explore and verify. Thank you for listening to this in-depth discussion.